So I went up, knocked on the door, and I said, a bit wet behind the ears, young activist, and said, good evening, sir. Would you consider voting the SNP in tomorrow's European election? And he told me.
Just as a conclusion from all of you, Kat was mentioning earlier that she's been out knocking doors, and I just wondered if you've got fond memories of election campaigning. Geoff, you must have an absolute belter of some stories from election campaigns from back in your day. There's an interesting thing here, I suppose, because as a chief of staff, how involved in campaigning are you? How does that kind of work when it's a kind of SNP, Scottish government? I don't know. What are your experiences of campaigning?
Too many to go on today, but I mean, I wasn't. I was chief of staff latterly, but I was a bagman. Let's be clear to begin with. And I've campaigned in many elections when the SNP were not a successful political force. And I remember one European election going in Marconi Road in Fraserburgh. Marconi Road back then was quite synonymous with quite a rough area of town in Fraserburgh. And there was a garden with a burnt out motorbike in the just literally in the garden. And I remember Stuart Stevenson, former MSP, and a couple of the activists, long in the tooth activists, saying, "Now, Geoff, you do that house." And so I went up, knocked on the door. And I said, a bit wet behind the ears, young activist, and said, good evening, sir. Would you consider voting the SNP in tomorrow's European election? And he told me off.
Right, good. Kat, have you been bitten by any dogs yet, or told to go away?
No, I think it's really interesting. I mean. So I was a candidate. I got selected as a candidate in the summer of 2014 and then stood in 2016. So that was a baptism of fire as a candidate over those 2 years in Scottish politics, and I can tell you that it's changed days now. I mean, those were dark days. Although I have to say, because I think when you first go door knocking, it's a bizarre thing, actually, when you think about it. We're all fey with how it is, but turning up on someone's door, knowing what their name is, and asking them how they vote, you might have data on them from before, so you can be like, "Oh, you voted Labour in 2011. How are you thinking now?" I mean, it's a bit creepy, frankly, but that's how it works. But because my first campaigning experience was with Better Together.
I noticed that you shop at Asda.
My first experience though was during the referendum campaign, and one of my first few times, I was going around, and normally you get paired with someone to start with to get a sense of what you do, and I was then sent off to a door by myself, and it was in off Leith Walk somewhere in a tenement, and I knocked on the door, and a sort of mid-20s rugby playing look of a man opened the door in a towel, and I was like, whoa. Well, I was like, whoa. So do you think we're better together?
I'm up for this.
And I was like, well, if this is what campaigning is like, I'm like, sign me up for every weekend and twice on a Wednesday. But sadly, that is to be fair, any men who have opened the door in a towel since have not lived up to that first experience. So
every weekend and twice on a Wednesday, Andy. What do you reckon?
Not in that instance for me, but each to their own. Let me tell you one thing that it relates back to the Prime Minister's current campaign, actually. In 2003, Scottish Parliament election, with David McCletchie, we were in Dunfermline High Street, and there was a shop in Dunfermline High Street called Peacocks. And David was standing in the high street, and the photographers had placed themselves strategically in front of that shop.
You are joking.
And I spotted this, and I rushed in and moved him out of the way. I was 23 years old. It was my first job. I didn't really know anything about anything, as most 23-year-olds don't. But I managed...
It's just changed, to be fair.
Well, there you go. But I spotted that and I
40 years
moved
on,
him.
it's still the same.
Exactly. Now, the reason that I'm saying that is that I, as a very green, inexperienced, useless 23-year-old, spotted that issue and moved him on. Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister of the country and has apparently all the best and brightest brains around him. And yet, in the space of 1 week, he has gone and launched his campaign in a monsoon. He has then done a press conference while his polls are tanking from the Titanic. He has stood in front of an exit sign.
And you missed out the visit to the brewery where there was no piss up.
Yeah, that's right, because he doesn't drink. He goes to visit a brewery and doesn't drink. You're right. So that was a fifth one. That's right.
And he asked the Welsh people if they were looking forward to the Euros.
Yes, he did.
Oh, and the councillors in the high-vis vests pretending to work in a factory.
He stood in front of the exit sign on the plane, and then the other day he goes and tries to play football. Now, if you're a campaign handler, right? If an opportunity comes up to go and do a campaign event, and they say want to get you to go and play football with some kids, and you know, Geoff and Kat will know this from their experience in campaign as well. The first thing you do is you get a ball and you take your guy out to the car park at the back of the office and you check that he's not going to make an arse of himself. Okay? And when you establish that he is, you change the photo op. You don't do it. You don't do it. It's so incredibly basic. It's the most basic stuff you could ever imagine. And honestly, I know it's a laugh and I know it's funny. I don't know what's going on inside that campaign team. It is honestly like somebody.
And we haven't even talked about the national service policy.
Well, I mean, the thing about national service, right, is that all election campaigns have stupid knee-jerk policy launches, and you can kind of forgive that because politicians do that sort of stuff. The thing that you can't forgive is walking in to bad media ops when they're staring you right in the face. Can't forgive it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give a slight defence to Rishi for a second because, you know, everything is about the context in which you're fighting an election, isn't it? You know, so if Keir Starmer goes to the Titanic, it's a great visitor experience. A wonderful, wonderful facility to be. You know, nobody's sitting there going because he's about to sink. You know, and somebody's just thought, "Oh, what can we do in Belfast? We'll just go there. That's great." And nobody's thought about the actual, you know, the message that it sends.
It's kind of
as well.
Yeah, but say what can we do in Belfast? Oh well, we're restored power sharing. Why don't we go and do a press conference in front of Stormont and then get the helicopter home from there? It's like it's not that hard.
But it's also about the narrative, because like it's once the narrative is fixed about someone, then it doesn't really matter. Like you're going to look for that angle. It's like, you know, remember there was that incident where basically he'd gone to something that involved him hammering something with the side of the hammer. And basically, it was kind of like in tune with the idea that, you know, Rishi Sunak was completely out of touch. He didn't know how to use a hammer. And there was this kind of like whole thing where basically it was like, oh, he doesn't even know which side of the hammer to use. Now, it turns out that he was told to do that and he was supposed to. But because the narrative and the perception about Rishi Sunak is so fixed, that's what everyone believed. The problem is that now the narrative about Rishi Sunak is that this is a gaffe campaign and that is going to be very hard to shake.
Yeah, and look, you know, the thing is as well, you've got to remember that you want to try and make your politicians human, you know, and you want to make them, you know, relatable to the public. And look, there was a time in 2011 when we were the polls were on the turn and Labour were just gassed, right, and we were just walking on water, and we started to view it as how and this is genuine, right? How we could push the boat out so much to make Alec look kind of silly at sometimes, just to see what would get the reaction. Really? It was that. So we went to Kilmarnock and he had this pie, you know, a killie pie. You've got
oh god, I've
seen.
Yeah.
And it was like, and it was, and then everyone like, I took a right hammer and I was like, You mark my words, right? It'll have him the front page of every single newspaper, and then his story that he was pursuing. And it didn't matter. So the point I think that Kat's making is it's the context in which you're fighting an election. You know, had we been up against it, there's no way we'd have him doing that. You know, in such a pose. But and that's what I kind of fear from that. The one thing I would say about the national service thing, and I was on BBC Radio 5 Live the other day, saying, hold on a second, I was 18 years old. at university working 30 hours a week as a pot scrubber, you know, to try and help fund it. So how the hell are you going to get me to go off for a weekend? Because I can't, you know, I couldn't take the financial hit. Just one slight interesting thing, and I think it might be an outlier, I'm pretty sure it is, but there was one poll that showed a slight narrowing once Don't Knows were removed, JLP Partners or something like that. And what was interesting about that poll to me was that there was a 12-point lead for Labour, but Reform's vote was 12 as well. And I think you're going to see a lot more of this in this election campaign. He's going to be going for what he sees as the kind of uber conservative votes, and you've seen that with the triple pension lock attempt as well. It will be interesting to see if there's some narrowing actually going forward, because he's clearly going for a core vote strategy, nothing else.
Thank you so much for watching. Press subscribe and you'll get all the best videos offering insight on Scottish politics delivered straight to your feed. Press subscribe and stick around. And if you'd like to hear our conversations in full, open up your podcast app and search for Holyrood Sources.